Hi, everyone. Welcome to Panel to Panel. My name is Brian Heater. I am the host of the interview podcast RIYL, and I am joined by Heidi McDonald of The Beat and Anthony Ha of ENIAC Ventures. Wanted to get some of the boring processing stuff out of the way up top, so we're going to be recording and posting the audio from the session for posterity on the RIYL YouTube page, so you can listen to anything you missed, or I guess listen to this over again if you enjoyed it that much. You can also check out past conversations that we've had, including our first one with Lauren Weinstein on YouTube and last month's with Glenn Head. This is our second time using Twitter Spaces. And like last time, we're going to kick off the conversation with our guest. And then afterwards, we will invite some of you listeners up to ask questions and join in. All right, excited to introduce our guest this month. We're trying something a little bit different with a pair of guests who will be discussing the state of comics publishing in 2021. Tom Kay is the founder of the Minneapolis-based Uncivilized Books. He's written for the Comics Journal and is a cartoonist in his own right, having released the Eisner-nominated Beta Testing the Apocalypse on Fantagraphics in 2012. Patrick Crotty is the founder and publisher of the Stockholm-based Pyow. He is also a senior designer at Random House Graphics, and he is also the artist behind the Magic the Gathering webcomic, Black Border Flowers. Part of what prompted this conversation, the idea behind getting everybody together to talk about this, probably as most of the people listening know, was Chris Spitzer of Ad House recently announced that they are going to be ending a publishing house. Also, Annie Koyama started winding down her own project a few years ago. So obviously, it's never been easy to be an indie publisher. But I think the big question looming over heads is whether things are actually becoming markedly more difficult for independent publishers. Patrick, I see you. Let's start with you. What's the state of indie publishing in 2021, and do you get the sense that things are heading perhaps in the wrong direction?
Well, I think there's another publisher that also kind of announced that they're going to be closing too, right?
Oh, Shortbox also.
A Swedish one, maybe.
Oh, Pyow.
Yeah.
Oh, Pyow. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Shortbox isn't closing. It's just their the comics box that they're wrapping up.
But yeah, I mean, Patrick, you did announce that Pyow was ending, and yet you just put out your greatest triumph yet, which is a comic video game, but which we will talk about. But yeah, what led to this decision?
Well,
what was happening?
So, I think there's probably a lot of reasons, and I can't speak for everybody. I think that a lot of publishers are just like coming to this on their own terms and figuring out things for themselves. But I feel, at least for me within indie publishing, and there was a big discussion over the weekend where there was somebody posting of what is something in comics that you wish you knew that somebody told you. And there was some really good discussion about that, but a lot of it was pretty sad and kind of just you would have to be a really good conversation starter from Chris Kindred was just bringing up the point that you either have to be lucky or also have privilege, or even just having money around you from some other source. And I think that's a thing. There's a lot of people that have maybe a partner who also just supports them, but they don't like to talk about it because it's not part of the cool story, by saying my partner supports me, But anyway, so we see a lot that comics are really hard to survive in with indie comics and just make it full time. And for publishing, I think for me, I've been able to see that on my own, and knowing that me as a publisher, I'm the one who's essentially providing to authors by being hey, I'm going to offer you this much and I'm going to make this book for you and sell it and whatever. And I can see how hard it is for even me as a publisher to make it to that point where I could reasonably feel I'm sustaining authors and giving them a pay that feels fair. And when we started, we made things that were small and we wanted to do things that were fun. And I think it was like a different time where like we could make things just because we wanted them and we knew like, hey, we don't have the money to pay, but everybody involved was enthusiastic enough to just like want to do things for fun, and our books were shorter. But as time has gone on, like we've been making bigger books. It takes more time for the authors, and it's like the amount it costs to make them goes up too. And it feels really challenging to kind of get to that point that you would want a publisher to be at. And also realizing that doing small press, like the idea of like printing a physical book in a different country, having it shipped across like anywhere in the world. And again, like you're making like a physical object. It's ridiculous. It's not a smart business thing, It's like really tough. And there's been so much more stress. Like everything that was kind of enjoyable about running a press, we were having less and less time for that and spending more and more time on things that we never really wanted to do. And if this is like our free time thing, if this is our choice to make books on our own time, it feels ridiculous to choose to do something that just doesn't feel good physically and mentally, and that was a big part of it. It's like, hey, like maybe we'll make books in the future, but for now, I think COVID was like it gave people time for self-reflection and thinking about like what feels good to me as a person. And that gave us space to be like, hey, is this really how we want to be like leading our books? Or do we want to like stop for now and figure out where we want to go with this? Or if it's like even something we want to continue with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that. And I mean, those are issues obviously that everybody's kind of been dealing with during COVID. But Tom, you are still publishing, right? Right?
Yeah, I'm still publishing.
That would be quite the bombshell to drop. No, but I think Patrick contextualized it in an interesting way towards the end there, which is if this is this thing that we're doing in our free time, with obviously implying at least to some degree that like this isn't the huge money maker with the nest egg that we're necessarily making our full-time job that we're going to survive on. I mean, Tom, obviously you've been doing this for a while, both with Uncivilized and just self-publishing and comics publishing in general. Are you able to call this your full-time job at this point?
It is and it isn't. I mean, it's, it takes a lot of time, but I've always conceived of it as kind of not like a full-time project, but as a maybe 50, 75% kind of project for me, because I teach comics. That's another thing that I do. And I also do my own work. So it was always kind of a, side project that I thought was important in just in terms of the general sort of comics community, but specifically within the kind of the kinds of books that we publish, which is, a little bit kind of left field, more experimental stuff, more literary stuff, more kind of weird philosophical stuff. So that kind of stuff just doesn't really exist in very many places. And I just kind of wanted to create that space for things like that. So, I'm thinking about it a little bit like, like starting kind of a weird small institution that kind of can continue publishing things like this. But there, what Patrick said is true, is like there's a lot of headwinds. Printing is getting more expensive. Printing overseas is become a huge challenge over the last, 6 months to a year. Making things like, we just made a ginseng roots box that will contain all the ginseng roots comics, and chipboard has like gone through the roof in terms of price. All of a sudden that box is a lot more expensive. So there's a lot of challenges that are happening. And some of these things are probably going to blow over at some point, some of these things are gonna stick around. Like, the whole distribution kind of shakeup is essentially in the process of becoming something else. And
Hey Tom,
yeah.
can you explain what ginseng roots is? And I say that partially because obviously Craig is somebody who has had some really big book deals and could probably get them in the future. Um, what is your sense of why somebody at his level chose to go with a publisher of your size?
For him, this is really like a side project, like it's something that he's always wanted to do, to serialize his work. He's never had a chance to do that. He always sort of goes dark for 6, 7 years, and then a new graphic novel appears. And this was a way to maybe stay a little bit more engaged with the audience over a longer period of time, and to sort of put the book together in front of an audience. And I think part of it is this is a more kind of journalistic kind of endeavor that he's doing with this particular series, where in a way he wants to engage the audience to kind of gauge their reaction and see what how it can kind of evolve as he's working on it. So in a way, this is more of a side project, more of an experiment. And really, we ended up with the project on some level, partly because I know Craig, but partly because there's not that many other small publishers or independent publishers that are interested in publishing serialized comics of this nature. Like the sort of the indie comics of the 90s and early 2000s are gone. Like there's not very many comics like this that are on the market, and so it kind of exists in its own little weird space. And then we also because we also publish graphic novels for the general trade market, so we're trying to kind of make this project exist in both worlds, where there's the serialized issues, but then we also do sets and boxed sets that can go to bookstores.
Great. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about
well, Tom, you've always had
as we get on.
Very different kinds of formats of stuff that you published, as Brian mentioned. I mean, you've done little monographs and hardcover full color books as well. And also, I mean, speaking about distribution, I think you were one of the first kind of indie presses to get distribution. I think it was through Consortium at the time.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And which is, kind of a little level up, I guess. But I mean, was that, did that help you survive to this point? Was it a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, without it, there would not have been an Uncivilized Books. I mean, when we sort of first conceptualized Uncivilized Books as like as a publisher, my kind of main goal was to get a distributor, to have someone to work with that that would take these books, nationwide or whatever. And the first book was Gabrielle Bell's Voyeurs, and I didn't feel like I could publish a book like that unless I had a distributor. So I kind of started looking around, and it just happened that in my own town here in Minneapolis, Consortium was here, and they had just signed Nobrow at the time, and were actively looking for small publishers. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and just sort of I talked to them, and they were on board, even though we hadn't published a single big book at that point. And then I introduced them to Koyama, actually, and then Koyama I think was signed maybe right after us. So and then kind of it snowballed from there. But yeah, that's kind of how it started. And without it, we just wouldn't have had the volume, and Diamond at that time wasn't really interested in any of our work. Just it was just a little bit too esoteric for them. So we just were, that's how we sold. We sold through Consortium, and we did pretty well with it, and we're able to kind of remain viable, for for lack of a better term. Not necessarily blockbuster, but viable.
And I want to get Patrick back in the conversation as well. Patrick, you were talking about just sort of the broader environment and deciding to wind down the publishing side of Piao. But at the same time, it's sort of a funny way of retiring in the sense that you also launched this digital reader. I would love to hear a little bit more just about why you decided to do that, and should we see that as kind of the next stage of the business, or really just kind of a last hurrah?
I think like doing something like this. So we still have books that we want to make before we're actually like all gone. We're still releasing some stuff before the end of this year, and then I always tell myself like just because I said that I'm ending, like I have the rest of my life to make another book. But the main reason for doing something like this is a lot of the things that I feel have been problematic for me and Ulla, who I do this publishing with, have been these kind of things like distribution, and sending things around. And actually, funny story. So we were in talks with Consortium a long time ago when I moved to the US like 5 or 6 years ago. We were like, oh, if we get distribution, it'll be easier for us because we'll have less work to do. And when we were talking, and we also had like very little money. So the idea of us like flying out to Minneapolis just to go on a meeting, we had to have like an introduction meeting to see if it would even work. We're like, we can't afford like just spending like $500 or something on a flight and hotels just to see if this is even going to work. Like that's how small we were. Like we never paid ourselves. All the money went to the authors. So it's like these type of investments that we weren't sure of were really spooky. So that was like my little side story about Consortium. But there's a lot of these kind of things with either like sending out the books, like now a lot of our money we have to pay for warehouses and even production. Like say if we want to have a book with a few effects on the cover, like if we wanted to have like foil and maybe like hologram and maybe some spot gloss and Pantone color, like spot colors, we can't really do everything we want with a book. We usually pick and choose like a few special effects to do with the cover. So doing a digital thing like this, I'm like, this would be kind of fun because I can pretty much put any effect I want on a cover as long as I can sort of recreate it digitally. And I can also do stuff that like doesn't even exist. Like I could have like animated covers, right? And page count doesn't matter, print run doesn't matter. Like you can make a book. And the other big thing so I'm kind of bouncing around here, is that I also wanted to make a digital reading experience that felt like it was actually taking advantage of a digital platform. Because if we're going to have our books around, even if we stop publishing, I think it's weird to close off the books completely, being like, hey, you can't buy physical books, and we're also just going to hide the digital books. I think the digital books will always be there, and that can be a fun thing. But if they are going to still stay around, like it would be really, really cool to take them in a direction that we feel would be fun. Like a main goal of all the books that we've published, it's like we've made books that we want to read. And this is kind of a natural direction for that. It's now we are making a digital reading platform that we would enjoy too, So that was kind of the main idea. And it wasn't so much of like, oh, I wonder if other people are going to like this. It was more of like, what would I want to see for digital comics? And I know that it's not very practical. Like it's not as simple as just like flipping through the pages and having the image just be, straight there one for one as a comic page. You can rotate an object around in 3D space, like you're not always going to have it look exactly like the original. But I think that's part of the fun of it. It's like the fun thing about reading a real comic is that you can read it like lying down, or you can, fold the whole book in half and read on the subway or whatever. And like this is kind of like that. It gives you a bit more freedom in how you prefer to read your book rather than just having like a PDF that you can flip through. And it's also fun. Like I like games, and pretty much everybody we work with is like really likes games. And we're just really trying to push something forward to do something that we think is fun and that we haven't seen before. And this is like the first part. Like I think that doing this, it opens up so much. Because when I started working on this, I felt like I can just make the book. But as soon as you start making things on your own like this, you realize like I can do pretty much anything. So like it once you start looking at it and you start thinking about what this could mean for storytelling or how you could present a comic in a digital form, that's something different than a visual novel, but it's also not a comic. Um, it's, I don't know. I feel like anytime I get in a conversation with somebody about this, like it's so easy to just start spitballing the coolest ideas ever just after like 10 minutes of conversation with somebody about this type of reading platform. Um, And right now it's so new that I don't know. Like I didn't have a big plan of like this is the direction where I want it to go, or this is how I want it to be. But I do want it to be a thing that it is an option that maybe more people are interested in trying out and wanting to build comics for this. I have my first mod where I've been working on a different person's book and just putting it over, like porting it into this reader. And it's really quick to just do it, just like putting a different book in here, but that's just the very basic, like there's so much that you can do. And I'm just really excited to see, what comes of this. So
Hey Patrick, quick question.
Yeah.
I love the video game. I downloaded it last week and I checked it out. And I really like the experience. I can totally see like crazy possibilities. So like the question is like, is there a way to turn this into? I'm sure there is a way. I'm sure there's a way. You just need the technical know-how, I guess, to turn it into like a platform where you can discover books and things. In a more in a sense, build a comic book store in 3D in a video game where you can go and grab things and read them.
I
'Cause
think that's,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
no, I think that's, okay. So even though I've said like, yeah, I have no idea where this is going, I do actually have my secret, like if I ever was in an elevator with like a really disgusting investor who's just like, I could convince in that elevator ride, I have the stuff planned out. But that would be the coolest thing if it was like a Tapas or a Webtoon, like that type of platform, or like there's some other video games like Super Mario Maker, like where you just make the levels and then people can upload. Like if it existed in that sort of platform where it's just open and then people can do whatever they want with it and then put things up, that would be really, really cool. But at the same time, like uh when you do that, it kind of it's I don't know, I think that would be awesome. And I think there's so many possibilities. It's just a matter of like how much I can do or how many other people I can convince to like help out with something like this, you know?
Yeah.
Because the other thing, it's like there's like this medium idea of like maybe Piao could continue doing like what it does, or there could be like it would be like a curated collection, or like like a comic festival where like each year there's like a release of like, hey, here's 10 books in this format, and then each one is like really, really finely tuned. And I think there's like a balance of figuring it out, because when it's really open, you kind of maybe lose customization, but when you do it more like collaboratively on a smaller scale, that maybe increases the level of having something really innovative, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But this is so new, and this is like the very first time I've ever touched programming and like my very first game, and like I did it all by myself. I did get some help from some people and like was able to ask in forums like, hey, how do I do this? Or like this code thing doesn't work. But um but it's one of those things like, yeah, I hate doing things by myself is also what I've learned from the doing the publishing, and especially when I've been working apart. I think it's really, really tough to do this stuff for a long time by yourself, like any sort of publishing. And I think like circling back to small press, that has been one of the tougher things, is like you're such a smaller team that like it wears you down, and you don't get that like refreshment of getting to take a break from things if you're the one person keeping it afloat, you know?
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, I think probably a big part of, so we were talking a little bit about why Craig Thompson chose Uncivilized to serialize the book. I assume a big part of it is the fact that you are one of a relatively small number of publishers, certainly in the US, that are doing, single issue floppy books. And obviously print is a huge part, or perhaps, even most of what you do. But what is Uncivilized relationship with digital comics like at the moment?
It's pretty minimal. I mean, this is one of the things that, when I looked at the numbers early on, when we were starting, digital was really just a small part of the market, and I just needed to. What I wanted to do was like focus on the best thing that I could do, and that was print at that time. That's something that's definitely changing right now. We're definitely releasing more digital stuff, and we're planning on digitizing a bunch of stuff that's older, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to try out a bunch of different platforms. I would love to put something like Patrick put together for some things, like sort of a more kind of experimental platform like that. We're looking at other kind of new platforms. We're even looking at the blockchain, things like that, as potential publishing platforms. So yeah, we're definitely like I'm doing a lot more kind of research, and we're going to be doing a lot of experiments around this over the next year or so. And I'm just not always. I mean, I know there's big platforms like Comixology, et cetera, but like, it's never been like my favorite kind of way to interact with it. But I also don't need to necessarily. Maybe I'll just give up and we'll have some stuff on Comixology. We'll see. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's a big experiment right now. And COVID definitely pushed kind of us in that direction more than maybe we would have otherwise done earlier.
And I think I mean, what you were saying about like having stuff on Comixology, like for us, we started making digital comics just because we knew like we're not going to reprint these things, or some countries it's like really expensive to send to. So it's like, let's just have a digital thing, even if it's not our favorite version all the time. Like, but it still is good. Like the story and the art is still there, and some people prefer digital. And I think so. I did some big moves, like physical moves over the past few years. And with that, like I've had like less and less books. And I've gotten to this point where like I don't really like to keep a lot of things. Like I either give away books or sell them, and with like games and music and other stuff, like I don't even buy those things physically anymore. And I think it's actually quite nice. And there's this one thing that I feel like there are a lot of books that still get made, that, physical books that get made, but they really aren't taking advantage or caring that they're making a physical object. And with so much like stuff that already exists, like I do feel like, sometimes I look at books that I'll read them and I'm like, okay, the story was good, but the printing and like this as an object is garbage. Like I don't need to keep this. Like it doesn't serve any purpose. And the only reason they print it on paper is just because they didn't know any better, or it feels like a tradition. But no, like I feel very often that in a lot of books, like again, it doesn't take advantage of the fact that you are printing a physical object, because there's so much cool stuff that you can do with the physical format. And if that's going to be the case, like I think that comics just hasn't figured out how to exist in a digital format that feels good enough to switch over. And like what I've been making, I don't know if it's going to be good enough for people to want to switch over or feel like, hey, like I don't need to make a physical book, I can make a PDF instead or whatever. But I do hope that's like an option that people feel like in the future, that to make your comic work, like you don't need to print something physical. And what I've really liked of like indie game communities is like they do these like game jams and stuff, and it's all like it has the same sense of making a zine or having like a zine fair, but it's so different. And I haven't seen that energy in a long time in indie comics, and especially mini comics. They're, I can see it sometimes, but I do feel like a lot of an incentive is just to print something physical just to sell it, rather than like printing physical to sell a story. There's a lot more of an incentive to make back the investment on the printing. But when it's something like this where the investment is a lot lower, maybe that takes away some of that idea of like you have to make your money back.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, our print editions tend to be, we tend to go a little bit overboard sometimes with the printing, and various kind of effects and things that we add to the covers and interiors, etc. or the kind of printing techniques we use. But we, because we're doing more kind of floppy comics, if forgive the term, it makes sense to potentially do more digital stuff as well. And then, I kind of had a little bit of a different philosophy about print. Is like, I do think of print as kind of a weird, like I'm a little bit of, I kind of, I have a weird kind of philosophical relationship with comics, and I think about publishing and printing, as a kind of a deep time thing, as part of a large, huge tradition that stretches back, a few thousand years, and to make something in print and to create something like that, you kind of join that community of books and ideas from that stretch back really far back, and they need to sort of exist in print in some way, for those reasons, yeah, so I definitely think of kind of Uncivilized a little bit more, again, like a little bit more like an institution rather than sort of just creating, not that we don't create just weird fun things on whatever, but like just kind of a general philosophical outlook is very much kind of, I think about it as a kind of a being part of this long deep tradition.
So I'm going to open it up in a moment for anybody who has any questions for Patrick or Tom or any of the rest of us. Just raise your hand in the app and we will call on you and bring you up. In the meantime, Heidi, go for it.
My final question for everyone is whether Patrick, you shutting down publishing, and I talked to Chris Pitzer a little bit about this, but I do think there's just a terrible lack of the community that we used to have in small press publishing, where we'd get together at the shows, and not having our slate of shows like TCAF and SPX and MoCA and all the rest of them. I just think that there's it's been a real loss to the community. I mean, have you felt, and also selling books, by the way, they're also a great venue for selling books. I mean, how do you think not having these shows has affected your what you do?
I know that going into knowing that, oh shit, there's not going to be shows for a year, I thought it was going to be really bad, but everything, like in terms of sales, was fine. Like that worked out well. But I do think that we were fortunate because we already had like a web shop and everything set up, so we didn't have to scramble to do anything different. But I mean, of course it's boring missing out on people, and even with these publishers also not sticking around, I do know that before I left, and even on the internet, like there's so many people out there that are still making good stuff, and there's like newer presses that are doing. I'm so happy because I feel like I'm like, hey, my favorite books are still going to be coming out. Like I would want to give shout outs to Lucky Pocket, who's doing really nice Rizzo stuff that I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. And also Glacier Bay is putting out really interesting, just like, I know things that I would have been really, really nerdy about when I started going to shows, and I would be like looking up to, or like wanting to be like buddies with these people. But that's just like a couple, and like I see that there's this awesome passion that still exists. Like just because I don't feel the same, I can still feel that energy is always going to be around. So I don't actually feel as sad as I thought I would have been.
For us, it was.
Hey, let me.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No. I was just gonna extend it to you, Tom.
Okay.
And how the pandemic has played out for you, and also I think Patrick touched on something interesting there. If you can answer in your answer about whether or not this is going to whether or not your relationship to tabling at shows is going to evolve moving forward.
Right. So definitely, it was definitely rough for us 2020 because we had a lot of plans kind of in place to go, for all the big shows, TCAF, SPX, etc. And all of that stuff kind of fell apart. Fortunately, we had built a new website just a couple years earlier that was a lot better than our previous old website. So we were able to kind of scale up sales on the website and sort of cover some of the some of the lost sales that happened through the festivals, and without, and if you don't have to travel, then you don't have the travel costs, so it kind of evened out. And although there definitely one thing, if you're distributed, Diamond closed their doors for a couple of months, and Consortium saw some sales dips, especially since a lot of bookstores closed. So so for us, definitely 2020 was kind of a rough time. But on the whole, we kind of stayed roughly the same in the end. Just because there was a lot of slack was picked up by online sales. And actually, Amazon, however bad they are, they, because they raised their sales numbers so much, Consortium did really well because of Amazon partially, and that helped us as well. So that's kind of how that looked. What was the second part of that question?
Yeah, so part of, I think, what Patrick touched on was that there wasn't a major hit to the company when they weren't actually tabling at shows.
Yeah. So we had a hit in the sense that I know there's books that would have sold better if we had access to the festivals, and just the cash flow definitely became very difficult for a couple of months. But it kind of evened out eventually. But there were like 2 or 3 months where it was just like I don't know. But beyond like us, like the artists themselves, like had plans. They wanted to go places. They wanted to sign books. They wanted to interact with audiences. They wanted to see their friends, et cetera, at all these shows. So they couldn't go. So I know there's a major bummer for a lot of the artists that we work with, because we do table quite a bit at a lot of shows. So not to be able to kind of offer that was a bummer for a lot of people.
So just as a reminder for everyone, if you have questions for any speakers, or you just want to engage in the conversation, feel free to raise your hand in the app and we will call you up. And we actually have one of our listeners up on stage with us right now, Yukon. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask us your question.
Hey, hi, is this working?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Awesome. I was wondering, when you were talking about the physical side, and where have you ever had something with the physical release of a book that you regretted, that you did feel like was maybe not worth it? Because I think every bell and whistle you can add is so great, but then obviously on the cost and return, whatever. But what's are there any things that come to mind of well, maybe that was a bit overboard?
I mean, I don't think we've ever experienced that. I know that there's stories within indie comics of books that I don't even know, because I didn't make them, but I know that there was this really big Kramer's Ergot that was really, really, really big. It was A1 or A2 or something, and that was problem because of logistics reasons. Bookstores wouldn't know where to put it on a bookshelf and that kind of stuff. But for us, I think we've been happy with all of the books that we've made.
I am also happy with your books, Patrick.
Oh, thanks.
For us, it's I don't think we've ever really regretted doing a book. There's definitely books that made more money, and then there's books that made less money. But on the aggregate, we're okay with the way that kind of turned out. Every time I talk to an artist about the format of the book, we talk about the size of the book, the actual physical size of the book, because there's certain things that work well in bookstores, and there's certain things that the bigger the book gets, the sort of the less shelf spaces there is for that size. So while the book itself may look amazing, I wish there was sort of more shelf space for books like that, where people could discover books like that. But that's something that I don't know if that can really change in any meaningful way. But sometimes you just need to make that beautiful book, and you just and you just see how it goes.
That's the line you have to walk, right? Is you want to make a physical product that incentivizes people to purchase a physical product versus a digital one.
Right.
I think too it kind of talks to. I was going to say that kind of like investment, I guess, talks to the kind of the deep time, whatever, right? Like that you're if you're throwing it more into the future as a physical thing, then it's worth having those things if it's such a part of the thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's still like, there's so many books and comics really, because books in a weird way, books kind of are their own metadata, so they can kind of translate into the digital world a lot more easily. Although, if you're a typographer, etc., you may disagree with this. But comics, there's so many different formats, there's so many different ways of kind of drawing, and there's so many different things that work really well on a printed page and just do not work well in the digital space, for whatever reason, whether that's just, bad monitors, bad screens, small screens, the way things are rendered, et cetera, et cetera. The importance of the printed object still is, really high. And I think that's one reason why comics as a kind of a category of publishing has not embraced digital and to the same sort of degree that maybe the sort of the narrative books have.
Awesome. So yeah, just a reminder, if you have any questions for any of our guests, to raise your hand on the app and we will invite you up. When you come up, just make sure that you mute yourself and we will ask you to unmute when it's your time. Speaking of, Allison, you're up next.
Hey, so y'all have kind of touched on this throughout the conversation, but I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about this. So anecdotally, while talking to people for the last year and a half about kind of pandemic debuts specifically, both for, returning authors and for people debuting as authors, it seems like people who have an existing audience have had a pretty okay kind of year and a half. Like people are really looking for comfort and familiarity, and the books that are familiar have done pretty well, but that it's been much harder than normal for people who don't have that built-in audience. But again, that's just anecdotally, and I'd love to hear if that matches up with you all's experience, or if you have any more thoughts on that.
I'd say that's definitely true. Like I've had that exact same conversation between me and Ulla, my partner at Piao. It's pretty much been exactly like that. Like I feel like the books that were ones that we knew didn't have as much of an audience, like especially in the US. Like if we've worked with artists that don't have like a US Twitter audience, they don't have like that explosive opening weekend or whatever that some of the other more straightforward titles have had.
Yeah, it's the same for us. Artists with a built-in audience that that either have been around for a while and they've amassed mailing lists and social media followers. They tend to do better. And then one thing to say about the festivals is that was a huge vector for discovery. Like that was people walk around, they look at weird new stuff, and they would kind of discover the new things, the odd things that maybe haven't had a lot of attention before. So for us, the loss of the festival was sort of a big part of that kind of loss of discovery. And then the other kind of part of sort of the comics sphere is there's really kind of a lack of like a great kind of review ecosystem. There really isn't like a great place where you can go. I mean, we have a few things out there, but it's compared to literature, compared to other things, that ecosystem feels kind of sort of underbaked. And part of it I understand, there's like very little money in that, so but that also is something that's lacking in it. The people who have an audience and who have been reviewed in the New York Times before, etc., they'll do fine. But like then the others who aren't as sort of well-known, don't have very many options for, review spaces and places like that.
Yeah, to be clear, like obviously, like this gap has always existed. It just seemed like it's gotten much bigger than usual in the last kind of year and a half, and it really made me think a lot about how like the mechanisms for building buzz for books and how this big emphasis we all have on being on Twitter all the time. This really underlines, like we were talking about earlier, how much kind of the in-person ecosystem of talking to people and going to conventions and just being in the same room and that kind of ambient awareness of what people are interested in, I think makes a bigger difference for books than maybe some of us realize.
And also, I don't know how it is for you, Tom, at the conventions, but for us at least, like we would always be there, and it's a lot easier to like hand sell too. If you're there and you can like push books on people a lot easier. A bookstore isn't going to do that. And online, it's like you don't know if somebody's going to read the description or whatever. But being there and like convincing somebody like, hey, pick up this book and flip through the pages or whatever, that does make a really big difference at shows. And that's been exactly a big part that hasn't existed. It's like you can like put the debut book or a book by some author that you want to start pushing. You could set up your whole table to just make them look even bigger than they are. And it's really hard when you don't have that opportunity for a whole year or more.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if I can add anything else to that.
Yeah. Hopefully you can all hear me again. And sorry for that.
Yes,
sorry for that ultimate Clem Fandango. Can you hear me moment? But I had some technical difficulties, and I upgraded my Twitter app, which worked. But both of what you were all talking about is absolutely what I was trying to get through in my question before. And I totally, just as a journalist, I so miss going to any one of these shows, and when I walk around and know you're going to show me your new book that you're so proud of, and I'm going to get that book, and I'm going to be so happy to come home with it. And at discoverability, Allison is absolutely correct. It's just very difficult right now to find new things. I mean, there's a lot of new things out there, new people working and making things, but not having that personal connection to it at a show, I find is very, very difficult. And I also, since Allison is here, I just want to plug Allison's podcast that they do, Graphic Novel TK, which is really fantastic about the business of graphic novel publishing. And thank you all for coming, by the way. I see a lot of friends that I really miss seeing at shows out here listening. And, it's great to see you out there. I wish we were all in person, eating that awful food at the Marriott in Bethesda. But anyway.
Well, this is going to be a little bit of a change of topic, but since we've only got a few minutes left, I did want to ask about some of the other one other big piece of news in the last few weeks, which was Substack signing with a number of big comics creators. And I mean, Brian and I, coming from the world of tech journalism, have seen this this whole discussion around Substack of like, is this the future of journalism? Is this really just a way that a handful of people, of like already famous and successful people, are going to make money? And I'm curious, Patrick and Tom, how do you see Substack as potentially becoming a bigger part of the landscape?
I don't know. I think it looks boring.
That's 100% fair.
It's like a Patreon. Like from what I get, it looks like it's like Patreon in your inbox. And like I don't know anybody who enjoys reading stuff in their email. Or I don't know. Maybe I'm just not really convinced by how this could be fun. But I also went very hard to try and make a fun way to experience comics on a computer. So yeah, it's maybe just not for me.
Hey, Anthony, maybe you can kind of, as somebody who has covered Substack for TechCrunch, can you kind of break it down a little bit and what their sort of successes have been and whether or not you think that they're well positioned for something like this?
Sure. I mean, just quickly, so Substack, I assume people are sort of at least vaguely aware of it, but it's essentially just an email newsletter platform. And for the longest time, that's just how people thought about it. Like, this is just a way you can send your email newsletters. But then in the last few years, particularly as they've raised more venture capital money, they're spending a lot of it just to hire or to pay big advances to talent. And so often not, I don't think this is the only people who use it, but often it can be people who maybe weren't really fitting with mainstream publications like Glenn Greenwald or Matthew Iglesias. But I mean, it's a very broad range of writers. And Brian has a Substack himself, which I'm sure he'll plug at some point. But like the ones who are kind of the high profile ones who have the big advances often are like these, famous writers who have often maybe attracted a degree of controversy. And then recently they signed with, Nick Spencer is the one I remember, but I think a number of other comics writers and artists as well. And the idea is basically we're giving you an advance, for a certain period of time, you're going to be releasing basically sort of quote unquote self-publishing your own comics, which are delivered to people's email inboxes.
Yeah.
Brian, did I cover everything? Tom, go ahead, please.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. And, I'm Tom.
Yeah, I have a few words on Substack.
Both your thoughts on this.
Sure.
Yeah. And also just whether or not you see any sort of like promising online platforms or digital platforms for comics going forward.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think, Substack may not be fun, but it's like, people already read in their email, and it's like, this is just a convenient way for them to get stuff, so they don't have to go to some other website and find this comic book or this article or whatever. So it's a convenient way, and it's been, email marketing has been actually really successful. It's like, it's kind of the oldest internet technology, but it's also one that's used probably by, vast majority of everybody out there. So to sort of like create a model around this and kind of monetize it or whatever, it was probably really smart. And I'm sure there'll be people that will succeed with this model. I'm wondering how sort of long lived it is. It seems like platforms kind of come and go online. And, whenever a company has, a lot of money for a while, they kind of throw it around, people get deals, whatever. It works great for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then, and then tumbleweeds. So we'll kind of see the longevity this kind of thing has. We'll see if it's still, I guess it hasn't really proven itself, at least not in comics, right? I mean, it has on some level proven itself for some of the other kind of like journalistic writers or whatever, at least in the short term. So that's kind of how I see Substack. And then, I don't know if, I really don't know about other platforms, but I'm, really excited is like, we're kind of in this weird interregnum. Like Diamond is sort of teetering a little bit. There's like another distributor, Lunar. There is, Penguin is in the mix. Things are kind of moving into kind of the physical space. And then the Substack thing could potentially start shaking things a little bit in the comic space, and potentially open some new opportunities. I really liked, Patrick's video game. I'm wondering if that's like, there's something there that can happen. Obviously, this is a very long kind of term view on that, because that platform would take a while to get built. But like, I think the kind of the 3D interface is an interesting one. It's something that's been kind of the new thing on the internet for a long time, but has never really kind of worked out. But it is also one of the most popular interfaces. Like if you just think of games, there, most of them are essentially, sort of 3D interfaces that, where you interact with the world. And that doesn't mean that you can't sort of do, the sort of the more boring things in that world. And there's already plenty of video games that are kind of boring, where you just kind of go walk around, do, kind of meet people and hang out. And that, that's also, exciting, but boring at the same time. It's not just like, running around and shooting people. So I'm wondering if that model can kind of grow and incorporate things like reading, and reading comics in some way, and then, format becomes, maybe that's the way to kind of realize the sort of the Scott McCloud dream of the infinite canvas, where you have a book that you can sort of kind of open up and it's a giant skyscraper comic book or whatever. So I don't know, like I think a lot of things are in flux, and maybe that's a good thing, it's not easy, but it's but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there's going to be some new opportunities that open up.
Yeah, so I know we need to wrap this up, but I do have one more kind of big picture question for you guys. And Patrick, I mean, you also work at Random House Graphics, so you're working at the biggest publishing company on earth there, and so I think you have a pretty good view of it. And I mean, Tom, you've always been keenly aware of the different levels of the book publishing industry, but I guess we see indie comics and a small press like you do really is a place to do the books that really matter a lot and that are so innovative and fresh and wonderful. I mean, they're my favorite comics, and just even researching for this, I was looking at them, and my heart was like, my heart was yearning for more of these books, but it's also, where do you think they fit in right now? I mean, we just were talking about Substack, and obviously, Random House Graphic just launched, and they're doing all these kids books, which are selling gajillion copies. And I'm looking at the book scan report that we do every year for the Beat, and more comics were sold last year, more graphic novels than ever before. And so, where do you see what you do fitting into this whole picture that we have right now?
I know for me, I think it's something I've been thinking about, and it also kind of is, I don't know if it's even correct or not, but I feel like from reading indie comics and then now also working with Penguin Random House, that the quality and the content of the stories, I think is on the same level. And in a lot of times, I think like what is happening within indie spaces is maybe even better. But the big thing that makes it so hard for indies to be equals is I've seen like the big part of what makes a bigger publisher work is the marketing and the PR and the distribution that they have. And that is the hardest, I think, at least for small press, like for them to develop and grow in, is these other parts that are maybe not related to the story and the book design and the book production, because that's usually what most indies I've seen, like their main focus is bringing stories and developing authors, but not so much the focus on distributing the books and doing really, putting a lot of time and effort into the marketing and the PR. In a perfect place, I would love for that to be equal for both independent publishers and really large publishers. But as of right now, I have a really hard time seeing anything in the near future shifting drastically. Like I just imagine that it'll continue kind of as it has.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment, which bleak as it is. One thing that gives me a little bit of hope is we do have distribution, and it's nationwide or whatever. We don't have the marketing power that some others do. There's once you walk through the distribution door, you notice that there's like other doors, and it's like, oh, this door costs $10,000. You can walk through the door and your book will be a lot more visible. And so once you're kind of in that game, the game continues beyond that, just having a distributor. But then the other thing that's happening, and this is something that was exciting me back when we were starting Uncivilized, is just the kind of the growth of the graphic novel market, sort of something that really diversified, like genres of books, authors, etc., and created a really different kind of market for things that maybe before were really very niche, but like in a bookstore, a weird surrealist novel, it's still niche, but it's not as niche as it is in the comic book store, so it opens up doors for material that maybe didn't really have much room before, in at least in the sort of the comic book store post the sort of the big bust in the 90s, which was 93 or something like that. Comic book stores kind of moved away from carrying a lot of indies, and kind of moved it more into kind of pop culture kind of realms of entertainment, which which is fine, but but then left a lot of other publishers in the lurch. And this is why D&Q and Fantagraphics, etc., really made a big push for the graphic novel market, and I think they benefited from that. But then, the growth of kids comics and things like that, I think that, I hope that means in, 10, 15 years from now, or 5 years from now, there'll be sort of a shift, and that audience is going to start growing up, and they're going to look for comics that, kind of match their age range, and they're going to look at things like Uncivilized Books, hopefully, and that ecosystem will kind of keep growing, and absorbing some of the weirder stuff. That's at least my hope.
Awesome. I think we're at about time right now. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us. Thanks everybody for bearing with us through last week's technical issues and a few this week as well. I'm glad we were able to get through it. Thanks to everybody who asked the question as well. As I mentioned at the top, we have been recording this and we'll be posting it on my YouTube page, the ROIL YouTube page, for posterity. So if you missed out on anything or want to hear anything again, you can check it out a couple of days from now. And then this is a show that I think now that we've got most of the kinks worked out, are something that Anthony, Heidi, and I are going to be attempting to do about once a month. So we'll be sending out some more information on the next of these. Heidi, of course, you can check out over at comicsbeat.com. Anthony, you can check out his podcast, the Original Content Podcast. It's originalcontentpodcast.com. My podcast is RAYL. It's at RAYLcast.com. And the Substack that he mentioned is bheater.substack.com. Thank you so much to our guests for joining us. Really fantastic conversation. I say this every time, but I think it's doubly true this time. I think we could have kept this going for another hour or two at least. Patrick Crotty, thanks so much. powstudio.com is the website. You can check out the digital disc comics there. Tom K of uncivilizedbooks.com is their website. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Is there anything else that you would like to plug as we're winding down?
Check out our podcast, Uncivilized Territories.
Oh, and
what is what number is Ginseng Roots up to now?
Ginseng Roots is 8 issues are out, and number 9 is in the works and should be out this fall, I think October or early November. I'm blanking on the dates right now, but that's kind of where we're at.
Awesome. Patrick?
yeah, and I guess, well, you said it. Just check out the digital comic of Internal Affairs. It's my comic, so it's like 3 books in one. And also I drew the comic, so it's still a good one. And other than that, follow Piao Studio on Twitter to just keep up to date with the last few books that we have coming out. We're going to be releasing a few books, or even putting them up in the web shop within the next month or so. So we'll update there.